Yo, what is going on, guys? Gabriel Santos here. My energy is going to be a little lower. It's 7:30 in the morning. I'm in the backyard. I don't want to be too loud, okay? But in today's video, we're going to talk more about why is it so hard to change your smoking habits, okay? And why is it so hard to make that permanent change? First of all, there's just like the pure chemical and psychological conditioning, okay? And what I mean by that is, if you've ever heard of classic conditioning, it's also called the Pavlovian conditioning, right? So think of a dog, right? If you're training a dog to sit, the way it works is you say sit, right? And when the dog finally does sit, you reward the dog with a treat, right? And so what you're doing is you're training the dog that when you say sit, his brain, his primal brain, associates the sound sit with the possibility of getting the reward of a treat, okay? And so the dog is basically learning, hey, when I hear sit, if I put my butt to the ground, I get a treat, okay? And so in a very similar way, what happens is over the years, okay, let's take, for example, wake and baking. What happens is when you first wake up, doesn't matter if it's 6 a.m., 10 a.m., 1 p.m., you've trained yourself that when you wake up, your brain is like, oh, when we wake up, we get weed. And so your brain is literally trained, your body and brain is literally trained to seek and crave the reward of marijuana, which is a high dopamine reward, okay? And so by default, if you've been wake and baking every day for fucking 5 years, 10 years, by default, you're gonna wake up and your body's gonna be like, oh God, weed. And what happens is, if you don't give it the weed, your body's going to feel the lack of the reward, and it's literally going to start screaming for it, okay? Now here's the issue. Unlike a dog, you have control over giving yourself the reward or not. Whereas when you say sit to the dog's gonna sit. It may or may not get the reward, right? So it doesn't have control of completing that conditioning cycle, whereas you do. And so the issue is that your body and brain is trained to smoke weed in the morning, right? But you're also in charge of making sure that you don't reward that anymore, right? And so it literally is a battle of your conscious will and your conscious self versus these unconscious conditioned programs that unfortunately you are the one that you've trained yourself to do this. Now see, we don't realize this, right? When we're wake and baking every morning, we're not saying, hey, this morning I'm going to train myself to be conditioned to wake and bake. No. What happens is we wake and bake, for many reasons. You want to have fun. You want to feel good. Maybe you want to avoid existential crisis, right? Depression, anxiety. And so there's a billion different reasons why we would want to wake and bake. One of the reasons is not to train ourselves to be, conditioned to seek marijuana in the morning. That's not what we're trying to do. However, if you're trying to change, that is what you're dealing with, okay? And so keep that in mind, right? And without droning this video on for too long, I think a very basic way to look at this is that if you want to make a change, a sustainable change, and it's so hard, oh my God, it's so hard, like, you're not used to it, right? You're not used to waking up and not smoking, right? You're not used to going through your day without weed. You're not used to finding other ways to be happy. Say that the very simple way of looking at it is you're not used to it, right? And the kind of tough part about all this is that it's on you to accept that this is how it is right now, meaning like whatever pain and sense of like lack you feel, like a lack of pleasure, lack of excitement, it's kind of like you just got to accept it, for real. It's like you just got to accept it. And the reality is you can go smoke weed anytime you want. You really can. And the reality is that's never going to change. Like 30 years down the line, you're always going to have the option, right? And so what changing your smoking habits looks like in the early stages is you having to decide what you want, why you want it, and then be willing to go through the process of change. And again, I think at the bottom of it, there's so many different angles to this, guys. There's so many different angles. But one by far is that psychological conditioning. Like, sit, get the treat, right? So the sit is like, it's called the trigger, right? The cue or the trigger, the psychological trigger. And for someone who smokes weed, you know, if you smoke weed for every little thing, like, okay, when I wake up, I'm gonna smoke. Before I eat, I'm gonna smoke. Before I go take a drive, I'm gonna smoke. Before I go to work, I'm gonna smoke. After work, I'm gonna smoke. During my lunch break, I'm gonna smoke. When I feel sad, I'm gonna smoke. When I feel excited, I'm gonna smoke. Like, when you've trained yourself to literally, every single thing in life has become a trigger for you to smoke weed. Like, oh God, I go to the backyard, I want to smoke. I see a hot girl, I'm gonna smoke. I see an ugly person, I'm gonna smoke. Like, it's like, oh God, right? And so literally your whole waking existence is a trigger for you to be stoned, right? And so it's like, fuck, look at the mess we got ourselves in. So I think really a big piece is just to accept that, like, you accidentally conditioned yourself. Really, and then to take ownership of that, right? Because what happens is a lot of us fall victim to this psychological condition. Like, oh my God, why it's so hard? Like, dog, you're the one. You're the one that accidentally conditioned yourself to do this, right? No one else is responsible for the position you're in. Nobody else is responsible for the position we find ourselves in. That's another part of the acceptance piece, but that's also taking responsibility, right? Because by taking responsibility of the fact that you're the one that got yourself deep in this hole, you can then take responsibility for getting yourself out. And it's all about, one of the main things is to be willing to take on that sense of responsibility, to put the victim card to fucking rest. Not to say that it's easy, not to say that you won't try and fail, but look, any worthy endeavors includes a lot of trying and failing, really. And so consider that it is pretty fucking hard to get out of the pit of marijuana addiction and dependency. It can be really fucking hard. And so if you find yourself unable to, like, oh God, I'm gonna go 13 years without weed, and you fail on day 13, really, like, it's not that big a deal, right? Put it in perspective. Like, it's really not that big a deal. Because I'm gonna say it, and I'll end the video with this. If you're someone who really is addicted or dependent on marijuana, like for reals, like been smoking it 5+ years, 10+ years, even 1 year of straight weed smoking, that shit can be hard, man, because it is easy to lose sense of our willpower. It is easy to lose sight of our ability to just act and think clearly, right? Because at this point, a literal chemical, right, in the form of a substance, a drug, has a sense of dominance over us, and that shit sucks, right? And there's like 13 hidden forces, psychological forces at play when you try and change an addiction and a dependency. Like, man, it can be real tough. And just to remind y'all, okay, so I smoked weed the summer after high school in 2010, okay? I basically, like, trained myself, like, you know, the first year was cool, like, oh God, this is all great, right, wow. And then by year 2, I was like, something's not going well here, right? But I still can find myself to change, because there's all these little psychological forces at play. And so from year 2 to like year 7, I couldn't figure it the fuck out, guys, right? And so I'd be like, oh my God, something's wrong. All the little things in my life were falling apart. I was like, I gotta do something about the weed. Couldn't do something. Couldn't find sustainable change. Turns out there was a lot of deep emotional issues at play. And it wasn't until like year 8 where I had breakthrough, and then year 9 I went year weed free, okay? So my point being, if you're going through a period right now where you know you need to change, but you've been unable to make that long sustainable change, consider that that's part of it. That is part of it. So if I had to give you one final piece of advice, just stay willing and determined to make this thing happen, okay? There was many times where I was like, oh my God, I'm figuring this out. Okay, fine, I'm gonna get back on it. Right? So those up and downs, that's part of it. And your breakthrough is coming. Your breakthrough is coming, okay? So just stay willing and open. Willing and open, willing and open, willing, open, focus, willing, open, focus, okay? So many of you have already crossed this bridge, okay? So I really want to acknowledge that as well. Many of you have already crossed this bridge, like you're good now, okay? And many of you are still trying to figure the fuck out. So don't worry. Many of us are succeeding. Many of us are finding a way out of addiction and dependency, finding more moderation, finding more responsibility. Some of us quitting for good, right? Doesn't matter what crossing the bridge looks like for you. Doesn't matter where you're trying to go on the other end. All I know is that some of you are here, some of you get to the bridge and go back, okay? But it's all gonna make sense, okay? So just keep it up. Keep looking for answers, okay? Keep willing to take more responsibility of the situation, and I'll see y'all next time, okay? So that's it for today. I love you all. Hopefully the video wasn't too down. Shout out Buddha. Shaboom. Boom, boom, boom. Shout out JPL. Jet Propulsion's Laboratory. All right, anyways, shout out Dodgers. I love you all. I'll see you on the next video. Peace.